What's going on, guys? It is Nicholas Persakis, Chelsea Football Channel, and welcome back today for a video. I'm gonna start doing every international break. Of course, there's no games. It's the international break, so shouldn't be a lot of news. You're really just watching your team play, or wherever you're from, or maybe you're just tracking to see how your guys are doing over the break. If they're scoring, they're getting assists, they're playing well. That's basically what you're doing. But the idea I've come up with, I think every international break that comes up, I am going to start reviewing how the players have played since that international break. So for this one, of course, we didn't do it for the previous one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to review how the players I think have played since before the previous one and this one. So I'm going to take their overall playing time from then into account until now. Of course, what I'll do is it'll be like an update for the next one. So like when we have the next international break in November, it'll be like if I were just to like go from the games that we're gonna have here in late October from October 20th to sometime in November. Because I think that if we just reviewing it or like giving a fixed upgrade would be more realistic because it's talking about form and everything. So I think that's a pretty fair way to put it. So we're gonna do all the players, and I think I'll do Enzo Maresca as well. I think that's pretty fair. Of course, we're just gonna go throughout the entire team. Players who haven't played, we will disregard. I think that's the only fair thing to do. I am not going to review players that are on loan currently. I haven't been able to see them play, and I can't give an honest review of how I think they've been doing. So I think it's only fair that we just don't touch on that topic. So starting from the bottom to the top, then I guess, and Robert Sanchez, a player that, of course, in my mind is still, we don't really know what to think of him yet. But from what we've seen so far, beginning to this point in the season, 7 games in, we're it's a 7.5. I'm gonna give him a 7.5. I don't think I can give him an 8 yet. He's been so inconsistent throughout parts of last season, and now it comes to this season. He looks like a different keeper in a way, but then you look at games like the previous one against Brighton, and then it takes you back to last season. You know, Robert Sanchez is a player that you know, we want him to develop for the sake of not only himself, but for the sake of this team. We want the consistent goalkeeping. So with Robert Sanchez playing well is the best case scenario, but it's about staying consistent with him. And so far, he's had a great start to the season in the Prem. Of course, he hasn't played any other games except the Prem. We'll get to the guy who has played in other games, but personally, I think a 7.5 out of 10 is very fair for Rob. Jorgensen, I think only playing in cup games this season so far. I think it might stay like that for a little while longer. Excuse me. I think a 6 is fair from Jorgensen. He wasn't great in the Servette ties. In the first Servette game, he was great. Second Servette game, he was very inconsistent. I think he could have done better in that one. The Barrow game, he didn't have to do anything. And then the last game in the Conference League, he was pretty solid. He didn't really make any major mistakes. Of course, they scored 2 goals, but you can't really blame him for those 2 goals. So I think it's pretty fair to give him a 6 so far. Bettinelli hasn't played a single game. You give him a higher rating probably for his team cohesion rating or something, or leadership, because he's like the oldest guy. Bergvall, another guy who's not going to play this season, so you don't grade him. Disasi hasn't been Axel disaster this year, but I think, it's pretty fair if we were to give him a 5. He's been literally bang average. Of course, he played right back, I think, in that game versus Bournemouth, and he was god awful. But in every other performance he's had so far this season, he's been an okay center back. Of course, he got a nice assist on that Pedro Neto goal in the last Conference League game. But personally, I think Disasi has been bang average. Of course, he can't being bang average isn't going to cut it at Chelsea. You need to be at the quality. We're going to talk about a player in just a second. But Disasi's been average. He can't stay like this. The only thing that's kind of saving him is his team cohesion, leadership qualities. Most players love this guy. So it's about one of these things that you got to just improve yourself. And hopefully, he can improve in that 5 out of 10 with the games he gets. Marco Correa, a guy who so much scrutiny last year, has an amazing Euros with Spain, and then so far this season has looked like that exact same player. Of course, I'd love for him to be in that inverted role outside of Gusto, a guy we'll talk about in a second. but I've loved him so far. He's been able to do everything as like either a third center back, whether it be a left back. So he's been able to do that so well. I think a 7.5 as well is super fair. I forgot to mention I was going to do half ratings because I think it's a little bit easier to grade like that because like it's on the border of giving him an 8 and a 7. If you're not sure, I think a 7.5 is fair. So I think Mark is going to get a 7.5. Of course, he'll be suspended for the game against Liverpool, but that doesn't take away from his great overall play so far. Tosin, he's only played in a certain amount of games so far this season. Another guy he's been one of those guys who's hovering in the positions for the immediate first team. But I think that Tosin probably deserves a 7. I think he's been very consistent and he showed great play through the times he's been on. He was pretty solid. I thought he was the best center back in that Europa Conference League game. I thought that in the game versus Bournemouth, his cameo was awesome. I thought he was great in that one. Overall, he's been a very solid defender. And for the fact that my expectations for him were very, small coming into this season, as I wasn't sure how much he was going to play. I think it's a really good start for him. Badiashile, as much as I've dumpstered this guy to start the year in the very, very limited amount of minutes he's gotten, he's a great passer of the ball, Benoit. He makes the odd mistake, which leads to a goal usually, and his positioning is a little bit to be, warranted. But I think Benoit's been great passing. In certain games, he gets a lot of touches, he makes a lot of passes. So I think him and Disasi probably get the same rating. I think just because of his positioning and marking and stuff, that's what lowered him so much. But his passing has kind of made up for it a little bit. And I think again, 5 out of 10 is average. It's the literally main average. But the thing is, him and Axel Disasi have to improve when it comes to being. They can't be average. You gotta be more. You gotta be more. You gotta turn to someone like the next player, Levi Colwill, who I think so far his impact has given him probably an 8. I think this is a player who is the main center back in this Enzo Maresca team. He plays in that very, I think, central center back position. He's the best passing center back, and his clearances, his blocks, he's putting his life. He's showing that leadership quality. Guy who's definitely going to be wearing the armband for this Chelsea team in the near future, in my opinion. Easily showing that he can get it. I think he gets an 8. I think it's not a horrible thought process. He's been great in every single game in the Prem. Hasn't really been a bad game he's had. So I don't think personally myself, I would have given below a 7 in any of the games he's played so far. So I think that Levi Cole was also a great start. I think an 8's very fair. And based off the impacts this team needs, he's made a big one. Of course, Ben Chilwell hasn't played. Actually, he played in the Barrow game, but you can't grade a guy based off one game. And only playing like 30. What did he play? He played 45 minutes in that one, but still, I don't think it's enough to really grade him. Reece James hasn't played this season. Hopefully he comes back after international break. Malo Gusto, of course, a guy who was absolutely splendid last season as a filler for Reece James. This season hasn't looked like the same player, but the thing is, how much can you blame on Malo Gusto's actual play, or how much can you blame on it on Enzo Maresca's style and him having to learn to play basically a new position? Because Malo Gusto has been that inverted wing back instead of Marco Correa, who I, of course, would rather have Mark play there. But Malo is the guy. He's so set on that right back being the guy inverting, which, in some ways, I guess it makes sense. But Malo, I think, is a guy who maybe only deserves a 6. I think a 6 is about what Malo gets, 6 out of 10. In some games, he's been making the odd mistake, especially in that last game. He got a really decent SOFA score rating, but the thing is, the stats weren't telling you that he was there. His ground duels, he wasn't converting his crosses. So I think Malo is a player that needs to, be one of these guys who could adapt into this system. Because I think Reece, and that's an if, because we're not sure when he's going to come back. When he comes back in, there's a 100% chance he'll fit straight into the system like a glove. I don't doubt it. Wesley Fofana, I think he's been probably the second, if not the third best center back. I think it's been second because I think the starting combination we have between him, Wesley Fofana, and Levi Colwill, I think they're just the two best center backs right now. Even though Wesley, I think, like Malo Gusto, has made mistakes, but I think he still looks solid. I think a 6 out of 10 for Wes is good. Of course, again, you have to remember this guy is still recovering. Of course, you can't make this excuse forever, but I think Wes is still recovering from a major injury. And I think it's pivotal that we don't slouch this guy. I think Wes is a great player. He was insane when he first got here. He was an incredible player for Leicester City. Um, we'll have to see how he does for the remainder of the season. I think this is a player we definitely have to look out for. Of course, Chelsea have made the French national team, like I think, check him, so to make sure he'd be ready to play for France because they're worried about his fitness, of course. So I think Wes gets a 6 for right now, but that definitely could change. Um, Renato Vega, I mean, dude, when you think about $12 million signings, we didn't even know if Renato Vega was going to be here to start the season or be loaned out. It's an 8 out of 10. We're talking about expectations from when this guy came in. It could be a 7.5. It could be, I think, just based off of what he has brought so far and the expectations that he had coming into this season, the fact that we didn't know if he was going to play at all, the fact we didn't know he was going to be loaned out, the fact that we didn't even know what position he played, that has only shown that he's been more versatile and better. He's played like three positions. And Reska said he's played attacking midfield, left back, defensive midfield. He's done it all. And he's been a super impressive player at all three of those positions. He's even filled in a little bit at center back as well. He's already played, I think, 3 or 4 positions this season. And for 12 million bucks, dude, you can't write this. This is great scouting, and we've only seen that the scouting from this Chelsea team so far this offseason has looked splendid, and this is looking to be one of the better windows they've had. So Vega gets an 8. I love this guy right now, and he's gonna play as the starting left back probably in that game versus Liverpool on October 20th. So that's gonna be something we're looking out for. Hopefully, Renato Vega can have a good showing in that one. Um, but that's enough for him right now. Let's move on to the next player, and a player who's in a lot of heated conversations right now about whether he's going to start. Um, Enzo Fernandez. Dude, we're going to be straight up. Fernandez has been good at times, and then there's times where you look at the guy like in the last game. Like I said in my match review, there was at least a 25-minute period where Enzo Fernandez could not play at all. He was taking the bad touches. He had 2 straight crosses where he couldn't even whip it in. He was yelling because he couldn't whip it in. And then he took a bad touch in our own half that led to a possession lost. Enzo Fernandez, my bad, gets a 5. I think he's been bang average as well. He is nowhere near the quality we know him to be. So we need to see more than him because a player we're going to talk about soon is going to be creeping at that door, I feel like. Carney Chukwuemeka's played, I think, 14 minutes of soccer all season. Of course, he would have played in that Conference League game, I think, if it weren't for that illness. So I can't grade him. Kieran Dewsbury Hall, pretty rough start for him in a way until that Ghent game. He was very good in that Ghent game, playing good passes. Of course, got his first goal in that one, showed that energy, showed that excitement. But I feel like you still can only give him a 5. In the previous games, he wasn't showing enough to me to give him anything more than a 5. He's only got the 1 goal this season. He's got nothing else. Of course, when we talk about certain players, we like to bring up him and Conor Gallagher because basically he was the replacement for the Conor Gallagher player. So Conor Gallagher last season had like 16 goal contributions or something. Dewsbury Hall had like 20 something plus in the championship, way less of a league. So, you got to be showing something out of the gate. But the thing is, of course, he's not going to get nearly as much playing time as a guy like Gallagher did last year. So you're going to have to take that into account as well. But at the same time, Dewsbury Hall hasn't been splendid, but he also hasn't been bad. I think also a 5 for him is very fair. Now moving into a player that we've seen a lot of this season because he's played in every Prem game, Moises Caicedo. I think that this is a player that is hovering between the 7.5, 8 range for me. I think I'm gonna give him a 7.5. I'm gonna give him a 7.5. I think honestly that's too low. I think Caicedo's been excellent this season. There's been games he's literally been the best player on the field. This guy, I think they said was the number 1 under 23 defensive midfielder in the world for a reason. So I think that honestly could tell you a little bit about my rating, but I think a 7.5 is fair. I think the Forest game and the last one just pushes it a little bit lower because I don't think he was that great in that one. I think if he was good in that one, I think another 8 would have been a very fair. But I think a 7.5 is where I'd put Moises right now. But he's an incredible player. Cesare Costa, I thought about not rating, but he played in 2 Conference League games. I think. No, wait, did he play in 2 Conference League? No, he played only in that Gens game and in that Barrow game. In the Barrow game, I would have given him a 5, but I'm actually going to give him a 5.5 because I actually think he was very, very solid in that Gens game. He looked very undercomposed. But in both games, you could say he did a job. Of course, he's more of a guy who likes to get forward more, so he's trying to learn this new role. So I think by giving him a 5.5, it's proving that he's starting to prove that or play that role. And we're going to see him a lot of these cup games because honestly, we weren't sure if Costa was going to be in this team this season at all either. Andre Santos and Leslie Guchukwu, I thought had better chances of becoming the midfielder starter in this lineup, and or midfielder starter, geez, the third or fourth midfielder in this lineup. But Cesare ended up becoming the guy as that backup midfielder, so it was surprising. But we're going to see him play a little bit in these cup games, especially in these Conference League games. I'm almost certain he'll start almost every single one. So for my rating, I think a 5.5 is fair. He's been a little bit better than average in the 2 games he's played. Kellyman, he's out with injury right now, but he wouldn't even be playing for our first team anyway. So Romeo Lavia, he was splendid in that Man City game. But he hasn't really played since. So it's very hard for me to give him a rating when he hasn't played. So I'm not going to give him a rating, I think, just because of the one game he's played is not a good game time. Pedro Neto is an interesting one. I think Pedro Neto is a player that has looked great in the games that um he's came on. In these cup games, he's been splendid. Of course, he scored in the back-to-back starts he had in the Conference League and the League Cup. Then you look at some of these cameos. You look at the Wolves game, he got the assist, and then some of the times he's just came off and he's looked explosive. In my opinion, Neto gets a 6.5. I think a 6.5 is very fair. Actually, no, I think a 6. I think he's a little bit. No, 6.5. I'll stay with my 6.5. I think the first thing was more fair. He scored some goals. He's got an assist. He hasn't started every single game, especially these Premier League games. Hasn't gotten the sample size that he probably has wanted to see. But I think a 6.5 is very fair, and I think he deserves that. Especially when we talk about the next player, who I think some people might be a little bit iffy on for me. But I think a 6.5 from Pedro Neto is fair. He showed his quality. He showed he might be taking Nani Madueke's spot. So I think a 6.5 is good for him. Now, Misha, what do we do with you? The last few games, Misha has looked good. Do I throw everything that's happened away? Of course, we're not going to do that. Misha has been Has he been a little below the average or a little above the average? Which one? Which one do I think? Based off of, I think, the last 3 games, I'm going to give Misha. I can't decide whether it's a 4.5, 5, 5.5. I'm going to give Misha a 5. I think that, based off of these last performances, especially this cameo in this last game, I have to give him a 5 mid-park rating as well. Based off of what we've seen out of him so far this season, I can't make it any more than that. I just can't bring myself to do it. Until these last few games, we haven't seen enough out of him. Of course, he hasn't scored yet this year. He's gotten assists, but he hasn't yet scored. And for a player who's trying to compete with another guy on that other side, which has gotten assists, of course he hasn't scored, but he has gotten assist. He needs to keep performing. So hopefully Mihailo can keep this little bit of form he's played so far with, and he can maybe get himself going. Noni Madueke, I think, after this, he had a dry spell before this Forest game, of course, of goals and assists, and overall, maybe you weren't sure with his play. But I think a 7 is very fair to give Noni to start the season. Of course, he earned his England cap. He got an assist in that England game. He got a cameo in. So you have to give it, you have to clap it up for this guy. You have to clap it up. He's been splendid to start the year. He's a player who's very ego based, which is good in soccer. If you can, sorry, my bad, football. It's bad in foot. It's good in football if you have that ego, and I think Madueke has showed it. He took 7 shots, I think we said, in that Nottingham Forest game, which, of course, you love to see high shot totals from a player. You love to. It means that they're ready to take shots on and they want to get those goals and assists. But the thing is, it's about shot selection, and his shot selection hasn't been good this year. And his teammates have to be a little upset with him. But so far, he's been really, really solid. He's the Enzo Maresca typical winger. I think a 7's very, very fair. Joao Felix, very limited playing time, especially in the league. He's been a little bit like him and Pedro Neto have kind of had similar when it comes to the amount of playing time they've gotten. It's probably somewhere very similar. But Joao has been probably a 5.5, 6, 5.5, 6, 5.5, 6. I gave Pedro Neto a 6.5. So I'm gonna give Joao Felix a 6. I'm gonna give Joao Felix a half less. He's looked great in some of these games where he started. The Ghent game, he was a little underwhelming, but you saw you see his movement, you see his play, you see his passing, you see his technical ability. So I think Joao Felix, it only makes sense to give him a 6. I don't think he's been average because I've been giving players who've been performing a lot worse than him 5s. So I think Joao Felix getting a 6 is very, very fair. Hopefully we can see a little bit more consistency with him, though, when he does start. Now, I'm going to highlight these 2 players at the same time because of the debates that's been going on with you know, how we are supposed to be starting these guys. Nicholas Jackson and Christopher Nkunku. Starting with Jackson, because I think this is how this season has looked so far. Jackson gets an 8 out of 10. Christopher Nkunku gets a 7.5. Based off of competition, you always have to you have to take into account how they've done. Jackson has had an incredible start to the season, 4 goals and 2 assists, I think, so far through 7 games. It's almost a goal contribution per game. And Nkunku, I think, has 7 goals total this season. So, of course, he has more, but you have to remember he's only got, I think, 1 goal in the league so far, and that was in the Bournemouth game. So you've got to take these things into account. The reason that Jackson is getting an 8 and Nkunku is getting a 7.5, I think, again, like I said, is about my expectations on these players and based off of overall play. It's tough to say that when, of course, Nkunku scored a hat trick in the game, but we'll just get into this first. Jackson has looked like that striker we've wanted. He's doing everything a striker needs. It's literally just about the end product, the finishing once he gets into those positions. He makes the right runs. He's great at pressing the ball. It's about whether he can finish the chances that are played for him if he gets them. He looks awkward sometimes when he gets in front of net. So he's got to just learn that killer instinct and put the ball in the back of the net. An 8 is very fair for him, in my opinion, though. He's been great to watch. Nkunku in a 7.5, I think, based off of the level of competition, he should be doing this. What gets him a little bit lower is the last game he played in, not the Premier League game, the Ghent game. He doesn't do the runs that Nicholas Jackson makes. So he wants to stick in behind and collect the ball like more of a shadow striker would want to do, talking about FM terms. But no, as a second striker, he wants to sit in behind and do all the stuff, pick up the ball and play it into the striker, not be the main man, I think. I think he's basically a prototypical center forward. He was basically irrelevant in that Ghent game before he collected the ball and got a goal. Like if he wasn't right there, he never would have scored. But he was basically invisible. Like they weren't finding Nkunku enough in that Ghent game to get him involved. But at the same time, it wasn't enough. But Nkunku has looked great. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. He's looked splendid this season. He hasn't done any wrong. It's almost harsh to give him a lower rating than Jackson has, but I think just based off prior expectations, I think it's only fair to give Jackson a higher rating. Now we only have 2 more players left. We're just going to get Guiu out of the way. He's not even getting a rating because he hasn't played enough games. He's only came on to run around the field. I think he only played in the 1 game so far, or 2 games so far, and it's only been for like 20, 30 minutes. Jadon Sancho, 7.5. It's a breath of fresh air with this guy. I feel like on that left-hand side, when you compare him to let's say previous guys in the left-hand side. So if we were going to compare him to Mihailo, it's night and day. This guy beats his man. He goes to beat his man way more than Misha has. When Misha has confidence, he takes on his man. But Jadon Sancho does it almost every time he collects the ball. He runs at his man. He tries to find something and he thinks about, you could see that he thinks about what he's going to do even before he does it. Misha, you can't see that. That's why Jadon Sancho has become the starting left winger in this Premier League team so fast because he could do those things. And that's why Jadon Sancho gets a 7.5. He's got the 3 assists in the 4 games now, I'm almost certain. So very, very happy with Jadon Sancho. And Cole Palmer, do I just give him the 10 out of 10? Or based off of my expectations for him going into the season, do I give him something lower? I've been doing this based off of my expectations I had for the players and their overall performances. So I think I'm just going to give Cole Palmer the 10 out of 10. I mean, what isn't this guy has done all season? He's got 10 goal contributions in the 7 games he's played in so far this season in the Premier League. Of course, I think he played in the one Conference League game as well, but we don't really count that one. So we're just going to take the 7, 10, and 7. This guy is unbelievable. There's not much else you could say about it. Cole Palmer is an impeccable player. And honestly, I've said it before, and I said it when he scored the 4 goals. I think he's the best player in the Premier League right now. Even though he didn't do enough, he didn't get a goal or an assist in that Forest game. There's a reason he got an 8.8. He almost got the goal to win the game for us at the end. I mean, this guy is incredible. There's not much more I can really say about the guy. That's it for these guys in the overall lineup. I think everybody's looked great. And then we get into Enzo Maresca, the head coach. Now, last season we had I almost certain 8 points in 7 games, if I'm not mistaken. 8 points in 7 games. I'd have to look it up, but I'm almost certain that's what it is. This season, 14-7, making it 2 points, averaging 2 points a game. 2 points a game. We are almost doubling our tally from the previous season in our first 7. Enzo Maresca has implemented his style amongst the players, and he's just making us a better team. The cohesion, the players' overall liking ability to one another, you could see it. You could see these guys love playing with one another. It's just about solidifying at this point the back line, the goal. I just think that's going to be one of the things we're going to need to work on all year. I don't think goal scoring is going to be a problem at all this season, but it's just about solidifying that back line and getting the midfield cohesive together. Overall, I think Enzo Maresca gets like an 8.5. I think an 8.5 is very fair. What he's been able to rejuvenate this team into what we've seen, we're in 4th place right now. When's the last time you could say we are in 4th place in the table? 2 years? A year and a half? How long has it been since we've been in 4th place in the Premier League table? For a consistent 2 weeks. And it's going to be for a little bit more because of the international break. How long can we say that? How long ago? So you've got to give the guy benefit of the doubt. Enzo Maresca has done a wonderful job with this Chelsea team, and these players are loving him, and they're playing to the quality that we've expected them to, or maybe above the expectation point. So I'm very happy so far. I think that the guys have done incredible. Overall, though, let me know what you guys think of my ratings. I think that, you know, when it comes to how we've predicted the season to go, of course, I had Chelsea finishing around the 5th place, 4th and 5th place this season. I think that with the new head coach, it would have been tough to give him a Champions League place outright, but he's been doing it, and he's showing that this team can get 4th this season. So if we could show this amount of consistency for the entire season, stay around this 2 points per game mark, maybe even improve on it, and especially after the international break, show that we can compete with these top teams. Getting a good result at Liverpool, getting a good result against United, getting a good result against Newcastle twice, and then maybe getting a good result against, I think, Villa after that are all crucial games. And then, of course, there'll be Conference League games in between that period, but it's about getting the right results. And if we can get those and stay consistent all season, we're clear as day. And Enzo Maresca is the right man for the job. And right now, I can clear as day say Enzo Maresca has done a wonderful job at this team. He's speaking fluently in these interviews, and I could not be more happy. Though, let me know what you guys think from my overall player ratings and coach rating. But see you guys soon. International break gives me a little bit less stuff, and I have a lithout bit more exams throughout this week. So thank you guys, though. See you guys in the next one. Peace.